In the late 1700s, deep within the silence of ours, Saint John Vianney's nights were not ruled by rest, but by terror, as unseen forces invaded his small room, turning sleep into a battlefield where faith was tested beyond physical endurance. Saint John Vianney did not describe these nights as dreams or inner fears, but as physical intrusions recorded soberly in his own notes, where furniture moved, walls groaned, and his bed shook violently under a presence he identified without hesitation. These disturbances did not occur during weakness or doubt, but during the height of his ministry, when Saint John Vianney's confessional hours stretched endlessly, drawing sinners, skeptics, and broken souls, provoking a resistance that did not come from human opposition. Witnesses later confirmed unusual sounds echoing from the presbytery at night. Crashes, scraping wood, sudden thuds. Yet each morning, Saint John Vianney emerged composed, exhausted, and resolute, never dramatizing the events, treating them as part of his assigned burden. According to his writings, the entity revealed itself not symbolically, but personally, appearing with form and intention, mocking his vocation, attempting intimidation rather than temptation, suggesting an adversary focused on disruption, not persuasion, targeting endurance instead of belief itself. The priest understood these attacks as confirmation, not contradiction, of his mission, interpreting escalation as resistance against the confessional's unseen impact, where absolution dismantled influence quietly, one soul at a time, provoking retaliation beyond the visible structures of the parish. Despite the violence of these encounters, Saint John Vianney refused protection beyond prayer, declining relocation or guards, convinced that endurance itself formed part of obedience and that fear acknowledged would grant the intruder exactly the authority it sought to impose. The disturbances followed no predictable pattern, striking without warning, often after days of intense ministry, as if calculated to exhaust rather than destroy, testing whether perseverance could outlast repeated assaults carried out under darkness, isolation, and physical vulnerability. Church records reveal no attempt to suppress these accounts, instead preserving them as sober testimony, carefully separated from exaggeration, emphasizing consistency, documentation, and restraint, signaling that the events were evaluated as credible manifestations rather than emotional or psychological disturbances. What unfolded in those nights was not spectacle, but confrontation, unseen by crowds yet decisive in scope, setting the stage for a moment when endurance alone would no longer suffice, and a boundary would be crossed that demanded unmistakable divine authority. The confrontation intensified when Saint John Vianney no longer described distant disturbances but direct engagement, as the presence asserted itself violently, overturning chairs, striking walls, and shaking the bed with calculated force, transforming the room into an arena of relentless pressure. These manifestations were not chaotic outbursts, but disciplined intrusions, occurring with timing and intent, as if testing limits, measuring resistance, and escalating when ignored, revealing an intelligence reacting to prayer rather than provoking fear through randomness or uncontrolled spectacle. Saint John Vianney recorded moments when the figure became visible, defined, and confrontational, addressing him directly with contempt, not temptation, attempting to interrupt prayer through noise, physical disruption, and intimidation, seeking collapse through exhaustion instead of moral compromise. At the peak of these encounters, natural order seemed suspended, as heavy furniture moved without cause. Sounds erupted without source, and physical laws appeared overridden, creating a contained rupture where force confronted faith without witnesses, weapons, or any visible intermediary. Rather than retreat, Saint John Vianney responded with intensified prayer, remaining immobile amid chaos, refusing reaction, as if recognizing that stillness itself resisted intrusion, allowing the assault to expend itself against an unyielding spiritual authority it could not penetrate. The turning point arrived when the disturbances abruptly ceased mid-assault, not fading gradually, but stopping with decisive finality, as if an unseen command had been issued, reasserting order instantly and leaving the room unnaturally silent, intact, and restored. Ecclesiastical authorities later examined these records with restraint, noting consistency across dates, absence of sensational language, and alignment with external testimonies, ultimately recognizing the events as extraordinary manifestations linked directly to pastoral effectiveness rather than psychological instability or folklore exaggeration. What distinguished this intervention was not visual splendor, but authority. The unmistakable impression that permission had been withdrawn, boundaries enforced, and resistance neutralized, marking a moment where divine governance overrode hostile agency without negotiation or visible struggle. Following this night, the attacks diminished in intensity and frequency, suggesting resolution rather than retreat, as if the confrontation had reached a conclusion, affirming that endurance, not escalation, had summoned a response beyond human endurance or explanation. The miracle did not end with silence alone. It altered perception, establishing that unseen conflict had been conclusively judged, preparing hearts to recognize that what followed would echo far beyond a single room, shaping memory, witness, and enduring reverence. After the nights of confrontation ended, Saint John Vianney carried no triumph, only gravity, as if something eternal had brushed the ordinary world, leaving behind silence that weighed heavier than noise, imprinting his ministry with unseen depth and irreversible seriousness forever, quietly. Those closest to Saint John Vianney noticed a profound stillness afterward, not relief, but reverence, as though he had crossed a threshold unseen, speaking less of struggle, more of obedience, carrying within him an awareness that heaven had intervened decisively once there. The parish of Ars felt the change indirectly, through calmer nights, steadier confessions, and a priest whose presence carried authority without force, suggesting that an unseen conflict had concluded, leaving order restored and vigilance quietly embedded within daily pastoral life thereafter. Enduring. Church historians later emphasized restraint in interpreting these events, underscoring documentation, consistency, and Saint John Vianney's refusal to dramatize, which strengthened credibility, allowing the episode to stand as sober evidence of divine authority asserted without spectacle within the Church's careful memory. For Saint John Vianney himself, the ordeal was never isolated history, but a lived reminder that ministry invites resistance, and that endurance anchored in prayer can summon protection, not seen, yet absolute, enforcing limits no darkness may cross again thereafter. Accounts of the so-called night devil did not spread as legend among crowds, but remained carefully preserved within clerical memory, cited to affirm that spiritual warfare is neither metaphor nor theater, but an ordered reality governed by divine permission alone, always. This recognition deepened reverence rather than fear, guiding believers to understand that holiness attracts opposition precisely because it disrupts unseen systems, and that divine presence manifests not through comfort, but through authority that secures the faithful without display, quietly, enduringly. In later reflections, Saint John Vianney acknowledged no victory of his own, only gratitude, perceiving himself as witness rather than hero, shaped by an encounter that reaffirmed obedience, humility, and the measured strength granted to those who remain steadfast therein. The legacy of these nights endures not in noise or imagery, but in the disciplined faith they produced, reminding the Church that the sacred often reveals itself through silence, restraint, and boundaries firmly set by God's sovereign will alone, forever. As the story closes, no spectacle remains, only the weight of certainty, leaving listeners with quiet awe, an inward stillness, and a conviction that such moments invite not applause, but a whispered amen, rising unprompted from the heart alone, gently.